Hello, everyone. I am truly, truly excited and honored to welcome you today to today's discussion of Alta Live about gay veterans and the fight for honorable discharges. This is a fascinating and tragic story from our country's history, where beginning in the McCarthy era, more than 30,000 men and women were kicked out of the military on charges of homosexuality. We have an extraordinary article in our magazine called The Undesirables. That was the term used to describe gay people, the reason used to kick them out. It was written by Nicole Garcia and David Woolman with gorgeous photos by Penny Gladstone, and I really encourage you to check it out. Today's Alta Live is we're going to kind of dig deeper into that story with some of the people involved and people who have been impacted by bigoted policies the United States military has once held and perhaps probably still holds. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our guests today before we dive in. Helen Grace James is a physical therapist and U.S. military veteran. She served in the United States Air Force, where she achieved the rank of Airman Second Class. She was discharged from the military as undesirable during the Lavender scare campaign to remove lesbian and gay people from government employment. 1960, she was able to upgrade her status from undesirable to general discharge under honorable conditions. We're going to get into why that's not quite great. In 2018, she successfully sued the United States Air Force, imagine that, to upgrade her charge to honorable, which allowed her to receive full veterans benefits. Aiding her in much of this and continuing the fight is Elizabeth Kristen. Elizabeth is the legal director of the California Women's Law Center. Over the past 20 plus years, she has worked tirelessly to secure justice for those who otherwise would not have legal representation. Elizabeth attended Berkeley Law, graduating in 2001. She served as a law clerk for Judge Browning on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Elizabeth began her public interest career as a Skadden Fellow in 2002. She worked for more than 2 decades in legal aid work, leading efforts on gender equality and LGBTQ rights. In 2012, she was selected as a Harvard Law Wasserstein Public Interest Fellow. In 2015, she had received the California Lawyer of the Year Award for her work on Title IX high school athletics class action case. She has been named a Northern California super lawyer since 2016. Both Elizabeth and Kristen are kind of central pieces to the article. But we're also joined today by Jules Sohn. Jules is a Marine Corps veteran with over 15 years law enforcement experience and extensive public affairs, strategic communication, community engagement, social justice advocacy, and journalistic experience. She's actually currently an LAPD officer. As a past recipient of the Anti-Defamation League Sherwood Prize for Combating Hate, Jules has done extensive work partnering with LGBTQ plus community to create awareness and increase reported related to hate crimes and hate incidents. She is also a member of the training cadre for the Department of Justice Community Relations engaging transgender communities since 2020, and is a law enforcement member of the National Center for State Court Working Group on developing mitigating bias trainings for criminal justice professionals. Jules previously volunteered her time to support social justice efforts to repeal the discriminatory Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy and improve diversity, equity, and inclusion policies for service members and veterans through her national speaking engagements and advocacy. She served as a volunteer communications director for the Service Women's Action Network and was on the founding board of Sparta. We have quite possibly one of our most impressive Alta Live lineups that we've ever had. It is an honor, seriously, genuinely, is an honor to have you here today. And I am very, very grateful that you've taken the time to join us. Briefly, Alta Journal is a quarterly publication focused on California and the West. We bring you stories like this, and we do them in really interesting ways. For example, here's what Helen's big, beautiful story looks like. We also, host Alta Live. We give you opportunities to get to know the subjects of these stories, to dig a little deeper. We host the California Book Club. These things are free. Alta Journal is not. You can join us for $50 a year. I'm going to pop a link in the chat, and I hope that you support us with a membership. With that, I want to dive in and say hello to Texas, Arizona, Sacramento, East LA, Potomac, Ukiah. Hello, everyone, for joining us. Helen, you are kind of the centerpiece of this story, and I want to start with you. Helen, by the way, is joined with some friends and family, her technical experts, nerds, if you will, who will help her navigate Zoom if necessary. Helen is 98, if I'm not mistaken, and still fighting the good fight on behalf of America. Talk about a patriot. Helen, what inspired you to join the military in the first place? Can you tell us a little bit about your military service and ultimately about your discharge?
Yeah, initially my dad was in World War One. My uncles, my cousins were in World War II. I'm from a kind of a military family, so it always inspired me to think of going into the military. When I graduated, I was felt my mother thought I was too young and wanted me to go to school, so I went to school, junior college, and then a bachelor's degree from East Stroudsburg State Teachers College. Then I went to Florida to teach health and physical education, coached basketball, and because I had been basketball, I had been on the team in high school 4 years, so I knew basketball anyway. And so anyway, then I had decided to join the military. I had previously had applied for a commission, but it didn't come through, so I simply enlisted as an airman first class, I guess airman third class. And so when I was discharged finally after 3 years, I received 2 dishonorable discharges, one as a second lieutenant and one as an airman second class. So I knew I had 15 years to get something done about it. That was the limit. And you had a question?
So you have 15 years, if I'm not mistaken, to appeal
Yes,
the dishonorable discharge.
that's correct.
And so when you were discharged, if you don't mind my asking, what was there? I mean, they just said you're undesirable. Goodbye.
Yeah. Well, they had arrested me, and I had an officer with me every if I went to the bathroom, wherever I was grilled and grilled and grilled for hours, and finally, they came to talking about my family and wanted to. They said they'd go to my family and ask. Well, they asked, what, what did you think about your mother? What did you think about your sister? And so it became, after all the hours, that's what it ended up as. And I decided I could not go on with this. And I said, you write down anything you want to, and I will sign it.
Right.
So that
You were
ended up.
essentially forced into confessing to being undesirable, which is, were you an out lesbian at that point?
No, not really. No.
Not in those days. Are you
In
kidding?
those days, I didn't even know what a lesbian was.
Still
it
scary
was-
these days.
Yeah,
They were her friends.
yeah.
Yeah.
We lived in the barracks of, I was stationed in Long Island. Finally, I became a radio operator in Mississippi. And we were in the Air Defense Command. We were in a kind of a secret installation, which was, not a base. We were in the woods in Long Island, and were the head of the 26th Air Division Defense Command. So we reported everything along the East Coast. We would get in contact with all of the bases along the East Coast and report every hour on the hour. And so that we were, this was, what was the war? What war was it?
Cold War,
Korean.
Korean?
It was a Korean War. So we were defending the East Coast from submarines or people.
Flying
Sure.
operator.
Yes. Anything.
Why do you think you were signaled? Why were you targeted?
Why was I targeted?
Yeah.
Well, we used to go down to dance at a place called Bagatelles. In we were in Long Island, so New York was close by, and we listen to music and hear music, and we could dance and enjoy just being together, and come back to the base, and we did our duty. We were good soldiers.
Of course.
And so then we were arrested.
Was Bagatelles a gay bar or a gay
Yes, it
hangout?
was.
Yeah. Okay.
That didn't matter to me,
Oh, one of my favorite places to hang out. Okay, we're gonna get into the legalities. Jules, I want to talk to you. You served as a Marine, and are a combat veteran. You served during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Can you tell us a bit about your journey, both to becoming a Marine and why that policy forced you to leave?
Yeah, so first I wanted to just thank Helen for paving the way for somebody like me. And so for me, I ended up in the Marine Corps in 1999. I actually went to officer candidate school. And for me, my family was a big motivator for going into public service, right? So actually, to kind of just touch upon what Helen talked about, my parents actually were children during the Korean War. And so they actually did not want me or any of my family to go into the military. But for me, I wanted to serve in a way. And also, I wanted to challenge myself. So I'm like 5 feet tall. And like, of course, look, how do you challenge yourself? You go to the hardest service that you can find. So the Marine Corps had the least amount of women, like 6%. Still to this day, it's one of as the fewest women serving in the Marine Corps in the service. And so that's how I kind of ended up there was I wanted to serve, and I also wanted to challenge myself and see if I could do it. That was part of the reason why I did it. And so I did go to officer candidate school, and I was commissioned as a second lieutenant out of Quantico, Virginia. And so in the Marine Corps, the other thing is that every Marine is a rifleman. And so every Marine officer also learns how to lead Marines in combat. And so the first stage of training was doing basic infantry training to be able to lead a platoon of Marines. And so every Marine gets the same training, and Marine officer as well. And so I was able to go through that. And then I was assigned to be a public affairs officer. So I hate public speaking. I hated it back then. And so I basically picked the one military occupational specialty that forced me to do things that were a challenge. And so I was able to get my first choice and do that. So I served in Okinawa with the 3rd Marine Division. I also served at Parris Island, South Carolina at the 6th Marine Corps Recruiting District. So I'm from California, so I'm from LA. I'm this Korean American in the Deep South doing public affairs for Marine Corps recruitment. So I kept finding myself in all these different spaces, but my time during this was I was in the closet the whole time. So I knew the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was in place. And so for me, I thought to myself, yes, I could be a Marine and I don't need to tell anybody about my personal life. And I realized that that's not very realistic, because you start to feel not only paranoid, and things were starting to happen where I was starting to get really stressed out, because rumors started going around about my my personal life, and under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, basically it was a nice way of saying, yes, you can serve, but only if you don't say anything, only if you don't tell anybody. But then, for me, I realized, hey, I don't know if I can continue to serve in this capacity. So for me, I actually left the Marine Corps, like active duty back in, like right around the Iraq War. So, Afghanistan and Iraq were like happening, and I was able to go to graduate school. And I actually was recalled to active service to serve in Iraq. I was stationed in Fallujah and Ramadi. And so, and actually I was very I was being told by a lot of my friends, like, why would you go back to a service that doesn't want you, right?
Mm.
Because I had to live a double life, and so for me that caused a lot of stress. But really, for me, and for a lot of service members, it's about, we want to serve so much that we're willing to sacrifice that to do it.
So ultimately, after your deployment, you left the Marines again, and now
Yes,
you
so
are.
yes, and that's how I ended up going to law enforcement, because I wanted to continue to serve.
Yeah.
And also, when I left, I made the decision to do some advocacy work, because there's a lot of people who couldn't speak out, and a lot of it's inspired by the work that like Helen did, and like what Elizabeth did, is like, hey, we're qualified, we're doing the work, we're willing to do this service, and yet, just because people have these really outdated thoughts and discriminatory practices, right? Because really, the best and brightest of us, it doesn't matter what our identities are. It just matters that we're willing to serve and we do a good job.
Yeah. And thank you for doing so. So Helen, you started to fight this dishonorable discharge in the 1960s.
Yes.
You had this 15-year window to start fighting. And I want to kind of, first of all, and I speak for everyone, we could talk to you guys all day because this is fascinating. But I want to dive in with Elizabeth with the legal stuff. But Helen, can you just clarify that you had this 15-year window to appeal the dishonorable discharge, and you had some success getting it changed to, how did you, at first the military said they had lost your files and they had lost
They
your
were
files.
fire, yes.
Yes.
Sure.
But ultimately you were able to get your status changed to what exactly?
Under honorable conditions. But
Which is not an honorable discharge.
it was not an honorable discharge. It was under honorable conditions, but that sounded really good to me. Not to be undesirable,
Sure. Yes. Elizabeth.
Well, and then I wasn't asking for any.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Did you have more, Elizabeth? I'm sorry. Did you have more, Helen? I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I'm so I'm
Okay, so we got to under honorable conditions. Elizabeth, can you tell us kind of how you found out about this and what the differences are for a veteran to obtain an honorable discharge, what that means for the rest of their life, because it's significant. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having us on. And thank you for the beautiful story that Alta did about Helen and her journey. She's continued to be an inspiration to me, as has Jules, and as has, for me, the honor of representing these brave LGBTQ veterans over the years. So when folks are discharged from the military, these days, I think not all of us have family members who served in the military or friends. And so I think people don't understand the real significance of the discharge paperwork that people receive when they leave the military. It's called a DD-214. And it'll have written on it both some sort of character of service, like honorable or general under honorable conditions or undesirable. But it also will have the reason for the discharge. And so for a lot of LGBTQ veterans, their paperwork would literally say homosexual on it. And so we have to cast our minds back not that long ago to when it was quite permissible to fire people for being LGBTQ. People were losing their children, losing their homes, losing their families. And this was essentially forcibly outing people on this paper that they often would have to show to get a job, for example. If you wanted to go to the police force, you would have to show your DD-214. So this paperwork has a lot of significance, both for the military itself, which gives a variety of benefits, like the GI Bill educational benefits, like healthcare, just a whole list of benefits that you may or may not be eligible for, depending on your status, whether you were honorable or general or undesirable. So it's for that, but it's also for public facing issues. So one of the issues that I hear from some of my clients about is, I want to have USAA insurance and I have to have an honorable discharge to get that kind of insurance. I want to be buried in a military cemetery or have access to the military old folks homes, basically. these all come back to this particular characterization of service. So it touches so many things.
Wow. I have USAA. I had no idea you needed an honorable discharge to get. That's fascinating. So when did you get involved in this, Elizabeth? And can you tell us about how you ultimately, after that 15-year window, um, Elizabeth is now, or I'm sorry, Helen is now been honorably discharged for her service from the United States Air Force. What was that very hard work like?
Yeah, so people are told they have 15 years to upgrade their discharges, and that's partially true in the sense that there's one level of review from the military that requires you to do it within 15 years. But there's other levels of review that say you can do this if you can show why you didn't do it within 15 years. So you have essentially a longer amount of time. So anybody who's watching or listening who it's been longer than 15 years, it's not too late. You can still get your discharge paperwork upgraded. There is a method for that. And I was helping people individually get their discharge paperwork upgraded. And it was really, really slow and cumbersome and difficult. And some of the barriers are just getting your military file. Then you have to put in the application, and then you have to wait. And so when I met Helen, she had a local veteran advocate who had put in her application already. So I met Helen, and in the article, you'll read the story about how I met Helen and how I didn't even recognize her because I was expecting a 90-year-old to walk up, and Helen showed up and we were looking for each other. But I said, oh, I don't know what I can do because Helen already did what she was supposed to do. She put in her application. But they had 18 months to rule on that. And I wrote to everyone I could think of, our local representatives, our senators, like, please expedite this. She is in her 90s. Like, she should not have to wait 18 months. So not only they said wait 18 months, they still didn't act on her petition. That's when we filed a federal lawsuit under the Administrative Procedures Act that basically said, you waited too long, you really need to act. And then within a month, they issued her honorable discharge.
Oh, fascinating.
But it
So,
shouldn't take a federal lawsuit for every individual LGBTQ veteran, which when we get the chance to talk about it, is why I want to talk about the case that Jules is leading, which is benefiting, we hope, every LGBTQ veteran in the country who was discharged under these conditions.
okay, that's going to be question number 2. The first one, Helen, how did it feel to get that honorable discharge?
It felt wonderful. I couldn't open it. I had to call my friend Kathy to come down and be with me to open. No. Yeah, so we opened it, and there it was.
Was it emotional? I mean, you've been working for this for 50 years, 60 years?
Yeah, it was just amazing to see honorable discharge. It was, it was a culmination of what I have been hiding all my life, all my years in public service and teaching at the university. And, I kept all of that as secret as I could. I never mentioned it. I didn't tell people I had been in the military, of course. And now I have an honorable discharge. It was just amazing.
You said you felt whole.
I felt whole. Yes.
That's wonderful. I'm so sorry that it took so long.
Yeah. Well,
Here we are.
important, but because it took so long, maybe that has an impact on what my attorney can do to make that feel better. Maybe this will get something out that will help other people, other veterans that have sat and waited and been discharged and tried to find another way to make a living. So it was worth it to me.
That's why my mom continues to help fight the fight, because it's so important for her story to get out there, because her story is going to help someone else get an honorable discharge that she waited, 61 years to get, and had to hide her service.
Elizabeth, tell us how Helen's work and bravery is impacting the work that you and Jules are working on now.
Well, Helen has been a continued inspiration to me. Not only did she fight this fight, but she came out publicly. She was the Grand Marshal of the Fresno Pride Parade. I mean, she became an iconic figure in our community. And I thought there are other veterans like Helen in their 90s who still have these papers that say homosexual on them. And we also can't do this one at a time. It would take 100 years to do this one at a time. And so luckily I had the opportunity to meet Jules, and we've been working together fighting the Pentagon on behalf of all LGBTQ veterans. And I'll put in the chat the notice about our lawsuit, which is going to hopefully be formally approved on March 12th, where we are going to create a system with the Pentagon to create a streamlined process for veterans to both get upgrades and also to get the word homosexual off their papers. So I'm very excited about it. It couldn't have happened without folks like Jules who are willing to continue this fight, carrying the torch to the next generation.
Jules, tell us about the fight. What are you doing?
So I'm very optimistic, cautiously optimistic about March 12th. But I will say that when I first met Elizabeth, she mentioned the case with Helen. And I think, when you think about certain things, are really the nexus for another thing. And really what Helen did was basically, not only is she a trailblazer for women in the military, but just in terms of this particular fight that continues. And so for us, like it's clear that once a person is discharged under whatever their pre-don't ask, don't tell or under don't ask, don't tell, it is so difficult to go back and face that monolith of the DoD or the VA to be able to fight to get what is you earned. You really did earn it, right, through your service. And so for me, it was interesting to work with Elizabeth in terms of figuring out, hey, finding veterans who are willing to be a part of this class action lawsuit. And it took time. Like Elizabeth was very methodical and she like amazing attorney. I work with, being in law enforcement, you work with attorneys, and I'm like, Elizabeth is my favorite attorney right now, besides Aaron Tax, who is my attorney when I was facing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Those are the two attorneys that I go, yes, they're amazing. And it's so important to pay it forward, right? Because how hard is it to, when you can leave, service on your own terms, you have closure, but when you don't, you don't have closure and you don't want to necessarily look at it. And so the hope is on March 12th, we can sign the settlement and have everybody there and be able to give some measure of justice. Because right now, that there's so many things that are happening, at the federal level that impacts a lot of what we're doing right now. And so for me, it's important to have all these victories. These victories are important for ensuring that, LGBTQ plus folks get the visibility, get the support, and are able to serve openly, regardless of identity. And because we are some of the best that the country has to offer in terms of public service.
We are getting some questions as we near the end. I knew we would go over, but there's a literal elephant in the room that I think that we should talk about. I think Elizabeth, as our in-house attorney right now, this question is probably best for you. Do you think that this comes from Deborah Jackson Weiss. Do you think that Secretary Hegseth's attitudes will slow down your efforts? This is Trump's appointment to the National Security, I don't know.
Department of Defense, the new Secretary of Defense. Yeah, I like the look.
I take no political stance here at Alta Live, but are you concerned that the new administration is going to slow down your efforts?
I am cautiously optimistic, like Jules, that our particular effort will be successful, that we will have the agreement has been signed. The Department of Defense has already committed to this. The notice I put in the chat is actually still on the Defense Department's website. So there's been no indications to us that this effort will be slowed down. Am I concerned? I think anyone who cares about LGBTQ issues, women's issues, racial equality, I think anyone should be concerned about this Secretary of Defense and this administration. but I don't have any current concerns about our lawsuit. This is really about righting historic injustices, which I think is so important, because if we're going to go forward and we're going to create our more perfect union, we have to fix the wrongs of the past. So I am hopeful that this fixing of the wrong of the past will be effective. And then, unfortunately, our work is not done. I think there are going to be more wrongs perpetrated, and we're going to continue in this fight. It's not an easy fight right now. I grew up in an era of expanding civil rights, and that's part of why I was inspired to become a lawyer. And so it's, I think, really painful and difficult to see rights contracting. But we all have to not lose hope. We have to think about stories like Helen, stories like Jules, continuing to fight for other people, continuing to fight for justice.
Can any of you speak to, and I'm sorry I don't know the answer to this, or I didn't do my due diligence, in terms of being an openly LGBTQ plus person in the military right now, are there any barriers to that are currently in place in February 2025? Are there any barriers for a gay person in the military right now?
I think the question really has to be broken out and put trans people in a different category, because as we know, the administration has been singling out trans folks for some of their worst policies. And so there is an effort to, again, renew the first Trump administration's policy to not allow transgender people to serve in the military. So
Which
that
Biden
is
reversed.
yes, and now they're
Trump
trying
is
to put it back into place. And so that, I think, is coming. I think, already advocates are fighting it, but we may see the same kind of bans against lesbian and gay and bisexual service members as well. I haven't heard that yet, but we have seen a lot of very anti-LGBT rhetoric coming from this administration. So I think we have to all be vigilant, not lose hope, not be despairing, but also be very vigilant about what's going to happen in the future.
Kristen asks, Helen and Jules, did you ever encounter someone who considered you not honorable and later changed their mind? I mean, I guess I wonder about that in the context of your fellow service people. Did you ever serve with people who were unkind, bigoted at the time, and have since come to respect you for your work? Helen?
No, I never met anyone that had anything about lesbian or gay people. It was a different time,
Yeah.
just a different time. I mean, it's more out there and current now. So
Sure.
no, in my day, no.
What about you, Jules?
I actually found a lot of support from folks on the backs, but like hidden support, right? So for me, people respected me because I did a good job. Like, basically I did my work, I did, and that's really what people in the military and in law enforcement care about, are like, you're going to be the person that I can rely on if something happens. And so usually just by merit of knowing how I worked and what I did as a Marine was what really like earned my reputation, right? And if I came out to them, which I came out to a handful of people, and I was very cautious, I would always ask to check their politics a little bit, and just to make sure that because at any time somebody could out you, and you could end up in an investigation and discharge. And so I was discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell while I was actually working at full time at LAPD, because I was still in the reserves.
Yeah.
And so it was actually based on, so there was somebody who didn't like me, and somebody who reported me. The only solace I had is I have some Marine friends who were telling me that it took them a long time to find somebody willing to do the investigation on me. So it kind of bounced around until somebody was willing to do it. And so for me, a lot of attitudes have changed, right? By the time Don't Ask, Don't Tell, was towards its final years. But unfortunately, we're seeing like the echoes of the McCarthyism that you kind of mentioned before today with the trans community. you know? So for me, I sit there and I go, we have to be vigilant and vocal and continue to fight. I mean, it's something where collectively from, you know, Helen and myself and, you know, future generations, we have to continue this work because it's so important.
Helen, I want to give you the last word. What is your advice to gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, trans people who are considering joining the military? What do you want to say to them?
I think know yourself first. Take care of yourself as well. Just go ahead, put a foot forward and do what you need to do to satisfy your inner longings. Who you are is important in the world. And you have to display that in ways that you are able to, but don't be afraid. Don't you know, subject yourself to fear and bad talk. You know yourself. We know who we are. We know what we want to do. We want to serve. We want to be helpful to people. We love people, and our families go along with us. But that's, I mean, that's beside the point. But yes, don't succumb to fears and hate, and you know, just one foot after the other, and just do what you do that you know best. Take care of yourself and the people that you love and know.
It sounds like that kind of bravery would make the perfect soldier, in my opinion. So I have chills. So I cannot thank all of you, all of our groups, our helpers, our friends, our community for joining us today. Helen, Elizabeth, Jules, friends and family who've joined us also. It's been an absolute honor to speak with all of you. And I am so grateful that you took the time today to share your wisdom and your advice and your experience with us. It is invaluable. And I am very, very grateful, as I'm sure our audience is. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Yes, you
Jules.
did a
Thank you,
beautiful job.
Elizabeth.
Thanks,
Thanks all.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.